On March 14, 1849, the county courthouse in Lowndes County, Alabama, was completely consumed by fire in what officials described as a regrettable accident resulting from an overturned lamp. However, amidst the ruins, investigators uncovered evidence that contradicted the official narrative. 3 sets of human remains found in the basement, shackled to iron rings embedded in the stone walls. The county clerk's records from 1847 to 1849 were entirely obliterated, along with property deeds, marriage certificates, and most importantly, the probate documents pertaining to the Sutton estate. For more than a century, descendants of families from Lowndes County have speculated about the true events that transpired at Bell River Plantation during those 2 years. Concerning the twin daughters of Colonel Nathaniel Sutton and the enslaved man named Marcus, who somehow managed to document everything before his disappearance. The information you are about to hear has been compiled from surviving letters, medical records from Mobile, and testimonies provided to a Northern Abolitionist Society, which remained sealed until 1963. Before we delve into the narrative of the Sutton sisters and the secrets that enveloped an entire community, please ensure you are subscribed to Liturgy of Fear and activate the notification bell. We explore the darkest aspects of American history that are often overlooked in textbooks. Additionally, leave a comment indicating the state or city from which you are listening. We appreciate knowing where our audience encounters these forgotten atrocities. The story of Bell River Plantation commences not with the fire, but with a funeral that took place 2 years earlier, involving 2 women who had been taught that survival necessitated absolute control. In 1847, Lowndes County encompassed some of the most fertile cotton-growing land in Alabama. Rich black soil that enriched men and transformed the landscape into realms of white-columned mansions surrounded by fields stretching to the horizon. The county seat of Hanville was situated at the heart of it all, a cluster of brick structures and dirt roads where planters conducted their affairs, while their wives feigned ignorance of the true nature of their wealth. The origins of family wealth were deeply rooted. Bell River Plantation was situated 8 miles south of the town, reachable solely via a private road that meandered through clusters of water oak and crossed 2 tributaries of the Alabama River. Colonel Nathaniel Sutton constructed the main house in 1828, a 3-story edifice comprising 12 rooms along with a separate kitchen building linked by a covered walkway. The slave quarters, consisting of 24 cabins arranged in 2 orderly rows, were located a quarter mile behind the main house, positioned close enough for quick summons, yet distant enough that the colonel was spared the sounds of the lives he owned. The colonel amassed his wealth through cotton, but his notoriety stemmed from an entirely different source. He had participated in the Creek War under Andrew Jackson and returned from that conflict with the conviction that humans could be enhanced through selective breeding, akin to the improvement of livestock. His library housed medical texts from Philadelphia, agricultural journals from Virginia, and personal correspondence with individuals at universities who shared his beliefs regarding racial hierarchies and biological destiny. He maintained meticulous records, including measurements, observations, and genealogies traced back 3 generations. His neighbors regarded him as eccentric yet brilliant. However, his slaves referred to him in a completely different manner, though never within earshot of white individuals. The colonel remained unmarried. Instead, he acquired a slave woman named Ruth in 1824 from a trader in Charleston, a woman characterized in the bill of sale as possessing an unusually fair complexion and genteel demeanor. Ruth gave birth to, in 1825, twin daughters named Sarah and Catherine were born. The colonel raised them in the main house, provided them with tutors from Mobile for their education, and dressed them in fine clothing ordered from New Orleans. However, he never granted them their freedom. He did not recognize them as his daughters in any legal documentation. Legally, they remained his property, a situation that afforded him complete control over every facet of their lives. Sarah and Catherine experienced a unique form of isolation as they grew up. They acquired skills in reading and writing, painting watercolors, and playing the pianoforte. Their studies included literature, mathematics, geography, and French. Yet they seldom ventured beyond the plantation grounds. The colonel dictated who could visit and when, meticulously screening every potential social interaction according to his stringent standards. He informed them that they were exceptional, that they had been granted privileges that set them apart from their peers, but insisted that the world outside of Bell River would never comprehend or accept them. He instilled in them the belief that safety was found in isolation, that trust was a vulnerability, and that power, no matter how limited, was the only valuable asset. The twins absorbed these teachings thoroughly. They created a unique form of communication through glances and gestures, often completing each other's sentences and at times remaining silent for days, communicating solely through notes exchanged across the dinner table. They donned matching dresses in complementary colors, with Sarah in deep green and Catherine in midnight blue. They read the same book simultaneously, one starting from the front and the other from the back, converging in the middle. They shared everything, including hairbrushes and jewelry, secrets, and ultimately something more sinister. Their mother, Ruth, passed away in 1839, officially attributed to pneumonia. Although the slave quarters murmured about the bruises on her arms and the fear reflected in her eyes during her last weeks. Following her death, the colonel's grip on his daughters tightened like a noose. He installed locks on their bedroom doors that could only be accessed from the outside. He mandated that they submit weekly written reports detailing their activities, thoughts, and dreams. He began to test them, placing valuables in conspicuous locations to determine if they would steal, introducing them to male visitors to observe their responses, and creating scenarios intended to uncover any concealed rebellions. The plantation itself thrived during these years. By 1847, the colonel owned 63 enslaved individuals whose labor yielded 142 bales of cotton each year. He marketed his crop through factors in Mobile and reinvested the profits into acquiring more land, more slaves, and more books for his ever-expanding library. The slave population at Belle River exhibited an unusual demographic profile, with a disproportionate number of light-skinned individuals, more children than the birth rate would typically suggest, and a troubling trend of families being separated and sold away just as their children reached adolescence. The overseer, a man named Jonas Pritchett, had been employed at Belle River for 15 years. He resided in a cottage near the slave quarters and executed the colonel's commands with mechanical precision. Pritchett maintained his own records, including punishment logs, work assignments, and dietary restrictions for the slaves. The colonel had designated for his breeding program. These notebooks, penned in Pritchett's cramped handwriting, chronicled atrocities with the nonchalant tone of agricultural reports, detailing which women were confined to which cabins, which children were fathered by which men, which pregnancies were terminated, and by what means. In the main house, Sarah and Catherine comprehended more than their father was aware of. They perused his journals during his business trips to Mobile. They eavesdropped at doors and collected snippets of dialogues between Pritchett and the colonel. They were aware of the events that transpired in the quarters after dark. They recognized which of the slaves were their half-siblings. They understood that their father regarded human beings as experimental subjects in his personal laboratory of racial theory. Consequently, they cultivated a hatred for him, imbued with a cold, patient fury that would have instilled terror in him had he recognized it. The morning of February 3, 1847, dawned with unseasonable warmth, temperatures rising into the low 60s even before noon. Colonel Sutton had spent the previous evening in his study, laboring by lamplight on correspondence with a professor at the Medical College of South Carolina. The household staff observed nothing out of the ordinary when he did not show up for breakfast. He frequently worked through the night and slept late. It was Pritchett who discovered him at 10, slumped in his leather chair with papers strewn across his desk. The colonel's complexion had a grayish hue, and when Pritchett touched his hand to rouse him, the skin felt cold and waxy. Dr. Amos. Grayfield arrived from Hanville 2 hours later and declared Colonel Nathaniel Sutton deceased, estimating the time of death to be sometime between midnight and dawn. A hard seizure, Dr. Grayfield stated, barely casting a glance at the body. The man was 56 years old and had worked himself to the point of exhaustion. I had cautioned him about his caloric temperament and the excessive mental strain. The heart simply gives out. It is as straightforward as that. However, several details did not correspond with this neat diagnosis. The colonel's dinner tray, delivered to the study at 8 more the previous evening, was positioned on a side table with the food scarcely touched. A cup of coffee, long since cold, exhibited a strange residue at the bottom, a fine sediment that shimmered faintly in the lamplight. The colonel's last letter, addressed to his attorney in Mobile, remained unfinished mid-sentence. I have made specific arrangements concerning the future of my daughters that must be executed exactly as stipulated for their protection and for the safeguarding of my life's work. Should any individual attempt to... The sentence trailed off there, the pen leaving a mark on the page as if his hand had abruptly lost strength. Sarah and Catherine stood together in the hallway outside their father's study, dressed in matching black mourning dresses that they had somehow acquired despite having no prior knowledge of his passing. Their faces displayed no tears nor any signs of shock or grief. They held hands, fingers intertwined, and observed the proceedings with identical expressions of vigilant calm. "We ought to examine him more closely," proposed Mr. Harold Breenidge, a nearby planter who had come to express his condolences. "Nathaniel was in good health when I last saw him at the courthouse last month. This appears to be quite unexpected. The colonel worked himself to death," Dr. Grayfield retorted, annoyed at having his professional opinion challenged. "I have witnessed this 100 times. The body simply fails. Now, if you will excuse me, I must speak with the daughters regarding funeral arrangements." But Dr. Grayfield never had that discussion. Sarah spoke to him first, her voice perfectly controlled and as cold as January rain. "Dr. Grayfield, we are grateful for your swift presence. The funeral will take place in 3 days with burial in the family plot. Mr. Jeremiah Osgood, our father's attorney from Mobile, has been called and is expected to arrive by tomorrow evening. Until the will is read and the estate is settled, Catherine and I will oversee the plantation operations. Pritchett will remain as overseer under our direct management." The men in the room exchanged looks. Women did not manage plantations, certainly not unmarried women barely 22 years old. And there was something more, something they could not quite express. A feeling that Sarah and Catherine had anticipated this moment, that they had rehearsed these words and were fully aware of how events would transpire. "Now, Miss Sarah," Mr. Breenidge began in the condescending tone men often used for women discussing topics beyond their understanding. "You cannot seriously expect to." "Our father educated in response to this eventuality," Catherine interjected, her tone reflecting that of her sister. "We possess a comprehensive understanding of crop rotation, market dynamics, and the oversight of field labor. Our examination of his techniques has spanned several years. This plantation is poised to maintain its current productivity levels." What the men were unaware of, and could not possibly know, was that Sarah and Catherine had been preparing for this moment for months. They had meticulously reviewed their father's financial records, committed to memory the names and skills of every enslaved individual on the estate, identified which merchants in Hanville could be influenced, and discerned those who should be avoided. They had strategized for every possible scenario except for one, the precise details of their father's will. The funeral was held on February 6th beneath overcast skies that threatened rain but ultimately did not deliver. 43 neighbors and business associates were present, convening in the parlor where the colonel's remains rested in a walnut casket lined with white satin. The Reverend Samuel Yates from Hanville's Presbyterian Church delivered a eulogy that lauded the colonel's contributions to Alabama's agricultural success and his commitment to promoting scientific advancement. Not a single enslaved individual from Bell River attended the service. However, they congregated in the quarters that evening for their own observance. This gathering was a blend of Christian hymns and ancestral traditions, featuring songs that honored liberation and the settling of scores. They kept their voices subdued, yet the sound resonated across the fields, to where Sarah and Catherine were seated in the main house veering. "They believe they are now free," Sarah remarked softly. "They will discover otherwise," Catherine responded. Jeremiah Osgood arrived from Mobile the evening following the funeral, a stout man of 50 with silver hair and the cautious demeanor of someone used to conveying unfortunate news to individuals who could complicate his life. He carried a leather satchel that contained Colonel Sutton's will and several sealed documents designated for the twins' eyes only. The reading occurred in the colonel's study, which had been thoroughly cleaned of any traces of his last moments. Sarah and Catherine were seated together on a settee, their black mourning dresses rustling slightly as they shifted their positions. Pritchett stood by the door, uninvited yet tolerated, his weathered face devoid of expression. Osgood opened his satchel and pulled out a thick document bound with black ribbon. Colonel Sutton had revised his will on December 12, 1846, less than 2 months prior to his death. The provisions are unconventional. The opening paragraphs of the documents contained standard charitable bequests to the Presbyterian Church, with personal items allocated to various acquaintances. Then Osgood proceeded to the section regarding the plantation and its residents. "To my daughters Sarah and Catherine Sutton, I bequeath the entirety of Bell River Plantation, including all lands, structures, livestock, equipment, and human property, to be held jointly and equally between them. However, this bequest is contingent upon the following stipulations, which must be satisfied within 24 months of my death." Osgood paused, cleared his throat with discomfort, and proceeded. "Firstly, both daughters are required to enter into lawful Christian marriages with men of appropriate character and standing, as approved by the executive of this estate. Secondly, both marriages must yield legitimate offspring within the designated time frame. Thirdly, the daughters are to maintain the plantation at its current productivity levels and exhibit sound management of its resources." Sarah's grip on Catherine's hand tightened, causing their knuckles to turn white. "Should these stipulations not be fulfilled," Osgood read, his voice lowering, "Bell River Plantation and all its assets shall be auctioned publicly, with the proceeds distributed equally among the following charitable institutions." The list included agricultural colleges, medical societies, and organizations committed to advancing the scientific understanding of human populations. This was the Colonel's final effort to ensure his ideology would endure beyond his lifetime. "There is more," Osgood stated, retrieving a second document. "A private letter addressed to both of you." He handed the sealed envelope to Sarah, who broke the wax seal with her thumbnail. Inside, their father's handwriting filled 3 pages of heavy cotton paper. Catherine leaned in closely, and they read together in silence. The letter articulated the Colonel's reasoning with unsettling clarity. He had noted their unnatural bond, their disinterest in typical feminine pursuits such as courtship and marriage. He concluded that they would never willingly part ways, nor would they form suitable alliances with men capable of continuing his legacy and effectively managing his estate. Thus, he devised a scenario in which they had no alternative: marry and reproduce or forfeit everything. However, the final paragraph of the letter contained something even more troubling. "I have made arrangements to ensure you make wise choices. My network of correspondents spans the state and beyond. They will be observing, reporting back on your behavior and decisions. Remember, you are always a product of my creation, and the essential truth of your being is inescapable, regardless of any pretense to the contrary. The blood coursing through your veins serves as both a privilege and a confinement." Sarah meticulously folded the letter and returned it to the envelope. When she raised her gaze to Osgood, her face revealed no emotion. "We comprehend the stipulations. Who is the executive?" "I am, alongside Mr. Breenage as co-executive. We are tasked with the approval of any marriage proposals and the assurance that the conditions are fulfilled." 24 months, Catherine remarked, "which means we have until February 1849. "That is correct. I must express, ladies, that your father's stipulations are quite unconventional. Most legal advisors would have advised against such measures." "Our father's intellect was entirely his own," Sarah interjected. "We shall adhere to his desires. Now, if you will excuse us, we have matters related to the plantation to address." After Osgood departed, vowing to return in 6 months to evaluate their progress, the twins remained in the study. They occupied their father's chair, with Catherine seated and Sarah perched on the armrest, gazing at the walls adorned with journals and medical texts, as well as the ledgers chronicling 2 decades of human experimentation, masquerading as agricultural management. "We cannot locate suitable husbands within 24 months, Catherine finally stated. He was aware that he orchestrated this to fail. "Not if we manage every variable," Sarah countered. "Father instilled that principle in us. He was convinced that humans could be bred like livestock, that every facet of reproduction could be controlled and directed. We will validate his beliefs, albeit not in the manner he envisioned." "What are you proposing?" Sarah rose and approached their father's desk, pulling open the bottom drawer where he stored his most confidential records. She retrieved a leather-bound journal and opened it to a page marked with a silk ribbon. Father's breeding logs. He meticulously recorded everything: which combinations yielded which results, which bloodlines he deemed superior, and which individuals he selected for his purposes. Program. Catherine joined her, peering over her shoulder. The entries were clinical and dehumanizing, depicting individuals as if they were livestock. Purchased male approximately 25 years from the Williamson estate. Good teeth, strong back, quick to learn tasks. Letters visible on the back indicate prior ownership in Virginia, associated with female number 4. Results: 1 male child sold in 1837, 1 female child retained for future breeding. He was a monster, Catherine whispered. He was, Sarah concurred, but he was also meticulous. And somewhere within these records lies the answer to our dilemma. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and Catherine immersed themselves in their father's documentation. They uncovered the full extent of his obsessions, journals spanning 2 decades, detailed genealogies, physical measurements, and observations on temperament and capability. He regarded Belle River as a laboratory, its enslaved population as experimental subjects, all in pursuit of his theories regarding racial hierarchies and human enhancement. Yet within that documentation, they stumbled upon something unforeseen. Evidence of intelligence, resilience, and resistance among the very individuals their father had attempted to reduce to mere data points. Enslaved individuals who taught themselves to read despite prohibitions. Women who utilized herbs and folk knowledge to manage their own fertility, quietly undermining the Colonel's breeding program. Men who sabotaged equipment and hindered productivity in ways that seemed accidental. Their father had recorded these shortcomings without acknowledging them as acts of defiance. One name recurred frequently in the later journals, always accompanied by notes of frustration. Ruth, their mother. The Colonel had acquired her with the expectation of a compliant bearer of children for his experiments. Instead, he encountered a woman who resisted him in subtle, persistent manners, teaching her daughters to read during his absences, whispering to them about the life she had known before slavery, instilling seeds of doubt regarding his absolute authority. She tried to protect us, Catherine said, tracing her finger over their mother's name in the ledger, even when she was unable to save herself. Then we owe her more than mere survival, Sarah responded. We owe her victory. However, achieving victory necessitated resources, time, and one additional element they had yet to acquire, a man they could completely control, whose presence would fulfill the letter of their father's will while entirely contravening its spirit. The solution emerged in late April, although they did not recognize it immediately. The spring auction in Haynesville attracted sellers and buyers from throughout central Alabama, transforming the courthouse square into a marketplace of human suffering. Enslaved individuals stood on a raised platform, while white men scrutinized them like livestock, inspecting teeth and muscle tone, and posing intrusive questions regarding work history and health. The air was thick with the scent of dust, sweat, and fear. Sarah and Catherine attended with Pritchett, ostensibly to acquire additional field hands for the expanded acreage they intended to cultivate. They donned black veils, still in mourning, which provided them anonymity in the crowd, and enabled them to observe without drawing too much attention. The morning sales unfolded predictably. Field workers were sold to plantation owners, domestic slaves to town families, and children were forcibly separated from their parents and sold to different buyers. Then, just before noon, something out of the ordinary appeared on the auction block. Next lot, the auctioneer announced. Property of the recently deceased Granville estate. One male, approximately 28 years of age, named Marcus. He is literate, skilled, and has served as a house servant and tutor to the Granville children. No history of rebellion, no attempts to escape. Starting bid, $1,000. Marcus stood on the platform with an upright posture and steady gaze, neither defiant nor submissive. He wore clean yet worn clothing, and his hands, indicative of someone who worked with ledgers rather than cotton, bore no calluses. His skin tone was several shades lighter than that of most individuals sold that morning, indicating a diverse heritage. However, what truly piqued Sarah's interest was an entirely different matter. He surveyed the crowd not with the expected air of defeat, but with a calculating gaze, as if he were assessing potential buyers just as they were assessing him. An individual in the crowd remarked, "Educated slaves are a risk. They get ideas above their station, ideal for a household requiring bookkeeping services." The auctioneer began the count. "How many among you can manage your own accounts? Here is a man who can do it for you. Now do I hear 1,000? The bidding commenced gradually. Most planters were reluctant to acquire an educated male slave, fearing the potential for trouble, such as reading abolitionist literature or forging travel documents. Yet a handful of town merchants expressed interest, recognizing the value in someone capable of managing their stores or handling correspondence. Sarah leaned in towards Pritchett. "Bid, Miss Sarah, we do not require a bid." Pritchett raised his hand. 1,000, 1,200, a merchant from Montgomery countered. 1,300, Pritchett declared. The bidding escalated to 1,600 before the Montgomery merchant withdrew, shaking his head at the exorbitant price for a single male slave, educated or otherwise. Sarah had paid above the market rate, a detail that would undoubtedly spark gossip in the coming weeks. Marcus arrived at Bell River 3 days later, making the 8-mile journey from Hanville with his few belongings in a cloth bag. Pritchett greeted him at the plantation entrance and escorted him directly to the main house where Sarah and Catherine awaited in the study. "You can read and write," Sarah stated. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus replied, his voice educated and measured, betraying nothing of his thoughts. "You tutored the Granville children. What subjects did you teach them?" "Reading, writing, arithmetic, some geography and history, as per their father's requests." Catherine circled him slowly, evaluating. The Granvilles were known abolitionists, Quakers, if I recall correctly. They permitted their slaves to receive an education. For the first time, a flicker appeared in Marcus's eyes, perhaps weariness or something else entirely. Acknowledgement that this dialogue was more intricate than it seemed. Mr. Granville held the belief that every individual possessed a soul and a mind deserving of development. "Ma'am, and you?" Sarah inquired, "What are your beliefs?" "I believe I am standing before 2 women who have invested excessively in me, and who evidently have a specific agenda beyond agricultural labor." The twins exchanged looks. Their father had instilled in them the perspective that enslaved individuals were mere objects, devoid of analytical capability or independent thought. Marcus had just exemplified both within a mere 30 seconds. "We find ourselves in an unusual predicament," Sarah stated cautiously. "Our father recently passed away, leaving stipulations regarding our inheritance that necessitate innovative solutions. We require someone who is educated, discreet, and able to comprehend intricate arrangements." "What type of arrangements?" "The kind that must remain confidential within this household," Catherine responded. "You will reside in the main house, not in the quarters. You will have access to our father's library. You will be treated well, provided with proper nourishment, and granted freedoms that would be remarkable elsewhere. However, in return, you will comply with our directives precisely as we issue them, without question or delay." Marcus remained silent for an extended period. When he finally spoke, his voice was notably subdued. "And if I decline these unspecified terms?" "Then you will be sold south," Sarah replied bluntly, "to cotton plantations in Mississippi, where educated slaves are worked to death in the fields to eradicate any intellectual aspirations. I can arrange for you to be on a boat within a week." It was not an idle threat, and Marcus was acutely aware of it. "What do you require from me?" "That is contingent upon your abilities," Catherine replied. "Can you maintain secrets, even those that could potentially be wielded as weapons?" "I have kept secrets my entire life, ma'am." "It was necessary for survival." Sarah approached the window, gazing out over the plantation grounds. "Our father's will mandates that we marry within 24 months or forfeit everything. However, we have no intention of acquiescing to marriages orchestrated by men who regard us as property to be controlled. Therefore, we are going to undermine the conditions while technically adhering to them." "I find it perplexing." "You will," Catherine remarked. "However, initially, we must ascertain if you can be trusted entirely and unequivocally." In the subsequent days, Sarah and Catherine evaluated Marcus through both subtle and overt means. They granted him access to their father's library and observed his reading choices. They solicited his views on political issues and listened for any signs of abolitionist inclinations. They monitored his interactions with the other enslaved individuals at Bell River, noting whether he sought to organize or incite. Marcus demonstrated remarkable adaptability. He maintained a low profile, spoke with caution, and exhibited an intelligence that had evidently been refined through years of maneuvering within perilous social dynamics. He recognized that educated slaves occupied a fragile position, valuable enough to be retained, yet dangerous enough to be feared. What the twins were unaware of, and could not yet comprehend, was that Marcus harbored his own secrets and agenda. The Granvilles had indeed been Quakers with abolitionist sentiments. Furthermore, they had been part of an informal network that gathered testimonies from enslaved individuals regarding the harsh realities of plantation existence. Marcus had dedicated 5 years to documenting atrocities, meticulously recording names, dates, and details in a coded shorthand he had devised. When the Granvilles passed away, both succumbing to fever within a week of each other, their relatives sold off the estate, including Marcus, before anyone could uncover the trunk concealed in the root cellar that contained years of carefully preserved records. Preserved evidence. Marcus had successfully retrieved his most crucial notebooks prior to the sale, concealing them within a hollowed-out Bible that no white individual thought to examine. He had been purchased and transported to Bell River, anticipating yet another phase of meticulous observation and documentation. Instead, he found himself at the heart of something far more peculiar and potentially perilous. By mid-May, the arrangement had become clearer. Marcus was to act as the twins' private secretary, overseeing household account and correspondence. However, beyond that, he would serve as their confidant in a scheme they had not yet fully disclosed. One evening in early June, after the house slaves had retired to their quarters and the three of them were alone in the study, Sarah unveiled their plan. "Our father's will mandates that we marry and produce children within 24 months, she began. "The executives must approve our choice of husbands, men of appropriate character and status. Yet the will does not stipulate that the husbands must be suitable for us, only that they fulfill external requirements." "I don't understand," Marcus replied. Catherine smiled, and there was something almost predatory in her expression. "We intend to marry men we can completely dominate. Elderly men, or those in poor health, or men so desperate for a connection to a wealthy plantation that they will accept any conditions. Men who will provide us with legal legitimacy without interfering in our management of Bell River. And the children?" Marcus inquired, though he was starting to grasp the situation. "Biology is biology," Sarah stated bluntly. "Our father spent 2 decades demonstrating that lineage can be strategically controlled. The executives need to witness marriages and pregnancies. They do not require insight into what transpires behind closed doors." The full ramifications struck Marcus like a splash of cold water. They intended for him to father their children, to fabricate the appearance of legitimate heirs while the twins retained control through marriages that existed solely on paper. "You are asking me to engage in an act that could endanger all of us," he said slowly. "If anyone were to find out, no one will find out," Catherine interjected. "We have complete control over this household. The marriages will be meticulously arranged. We will oversee every detail, every potential witness, and every piece of evidence. You will be safeguarded." "Safeguarded?" Marcus scoffed bitterly. "I am a slave. There is no safeguard for me. If this plan fails, you will face social ruin, perhaps even be exiled. I will be executed, either by hanging or burning, which is why you will be driven to ensure it does not fail," Sarah stated. "And in return, you will gain something that justifies the risk." "What could possibly justify the risk of freedom?" Catherine asked softly. "Documented legal freedom and sufficient funds to travel north and begin anew. We will wait until after the children are born and the estate is stable. Then we will manumit you, provide financial support, and send you away with a credible cover story." Marcus glanced between them, looking for signs of deceit or empty promises. "And if I decline?" "You will not," Sarah replied confidently, "because you desire freedom more than you fear death, and you are astute enough to see this as your only genuine opportunity." She was correct, and he acknowledged it. Yet there was another factor involved, something the twins had not contemplated. Marcus perceived in their plan not merely a route to personal freedom, but a chance to document and reveal the entire system. If he could collect evidence regarding the Sutton family's secrets, the Colonel's experiments, and the network of planters and overseers who had collaborated in decades of atrocities, he could transmit that information northward and deliver a blow to the institution that had taken his life. "I will do it," he finally declared, "on one condition." "You are not in a position to impose conditions," Catherine replied. "I am. If you desire my cooperation instead of my begrudging compliance, I require complete transparency. I want access to your father's journals, his correspondence, his breeding logs, all of it. If I am risking my life for this plan, I deserve to comprehend the full context." The twins pondered this. Granting Marcus unrestricted access to their father's documents was perilous, yet denying him could lead to the very resentful compliance he had mentioned. "Agreed," Sarah stated, "but you will study them here in this room under our supervision. Nothing leaves this house unapproved." What none of them voiced was that they had each just entered into a bargain with someone they did not entirely trust, wagering their futures on a deception so bold that it could only succeed if every element aligned flawlessly. And in Lown County, Alabama in 1847, perfection was exceedingly rare. Ormento Denson. The summer months brought stifling heat to Bell River, the kind that rendered the air as thick as syrup and transformed every physical task into a trial. However, within the main house, behind closed shutters and drawn curtains, a different kind of pressure was mounting. Sarah and Catherine commenced their search for suitable husbands with the cold calculation their father had instilled in them. They required men who met the executive standards for character and status, while being sufficiently vulnerable to manipulation. They compiled a list based on Osgood's recommendations and their own observations of Lown County society. The first candidate was Mr. Edmund Varley, a 68-year-old widower whose cotton business had faltered since his sons ventured westward in search of opportunities in Texas. Varley had been a friend of the Colonel's and expressed immediate interest when approached regarding a potential match with one of the twins, a splendid opportunity, he proclaimed during his initial visit to Bell River in July. His tearful eyes wandered over Catherine, wearing an expression that sent shivers down her spine. The union of two distinguished estates. The continuation of your father's legacy. I would be privileged to assist you in navigating the intricacies of plantation management. Catherine smiled but remained silent. After Vlay departed, she scrubbed her hands vigorously in the wash basin, as if she could erase the memory of his hand on her arm during the grounds tour. He'll suffice, Sarah remarked in a clinical tone. He is eager to redeem his reputation following last year's unsuccessful harvest. He will accept any prenuptial conditions to secure the alliance. I cannot, Catherine murmured. Sarah, I cannot allow him to touch me. He will not. That is the crux of the matter. The marriage is a legal fiction. Marcus fathers the child, Vlay receives the credit, and we retain control. However, orchestrating two such unions proved to be more complicated than expected. The executives, especially Breenidge, had strong views regarding appropriate matches. When Sarah proposed the idea of marrying a merchant from Mobile, a 42-year-old man with moderate success in the cotton industry, Breenidge dismissed him outright. Unsuitable background, he asserted. Your father envisioned you marrying into established planter families, not the commercial class. The man's grandfather was an indentured servant. For heaven's sake, the twins countered, arguing that the will's language did not specify planter families, only men of appropriate character and standing. Yet Breenidge remained resolute, threatening to petition the courts to clarify the will's intent if they persisted in advocating for unsuitable candidates. He is attempting to coerce us into marriages that serve his interests, Sarah seethed after one particularly heated meeting. He has sons. You realize he is likely trying to marry one of us into his own family. As the marriage discussions dragged on, Marcus delved into Colonel Sutton's documents. What he discovered there. Surpassing his most pessimistic expectations, the Colonel's breeding program had functioned for 2 decades with a methodical cruelty. He had enforced specific pairings, sold away offspring who did not meet his standards, and severed familial ties without regard for human connections. He meticulously recorded everything in clinical terminology that reduced individuals to mere data points. Female number 7 exhibits resistance to breeding assignments. It is recommended that increased discipline in isolation be applied to foster compliance. However, the journals also contained additional information, revealing a network. The Colonel did not operate in solitude. He communicated with other planters, medical professionals, and academics from southern universities. They shared research findings, compared methodologies, and deliberated on ways to promote their theories regarding racial hierarchies and human enhancement. Marcus began to make careful copies of the most incriminating entries using paper that Sarah provided for household accounts, writing late at night after the twins had gone to bed. He devised a method for concealing his copied pages within a hollowed-out section of his mattress, creating a secret archive that would eventually be sent north. However, he also started to observe something that the twins did not mention: the pattern of illness among Bell Rivers's enslaved population. In late July, 3 women in the quarters exhibited symptoms such as lesions, fever, and progressive weakness. Pritchett reported it in a casual manner, suggesting they be isolated and given minimal care until they either recovered or succumbed. Yet, Marcus had perused the Colonel's private medical notes and recognized the condition he was witnessing: syphilis. The Colonel had infected numerous women, either intentionally as part of his research or through his systematic sexual exploitation. Now the disease was proliferating through the quarters, transmitted between couples and from mothers to infants. Marcus presented his findings to Sarah and Catherine one evening, laying out the medical texts he had discovered, complete with their father's annotations. Your father infected them with syphilis. Either he contracted the disease himself and either spread it or exposed them intentionally. The journals indicate both possibilities, and it is proving fatal for them. Catherine's complexion turned pale. How many? Currently, at least 7 are exhibiting symptoms, but syphilis can lie dormant for many years. Without a proper medical examination, it is impossible to ascertain how many are infected. And even then, he trailed off, the futility apparent. Sarah abruptly stood and moved to the window, her back stiff. Is it treatable? Mercury treatments are sometimes effective, but they are nearly as hazardous as the disease itself, costly, and would necessitate a physician willing to treat enslaved individuals properly, which Marcus did not need to complete that thought either. Do it anyway, Sarah instructed without turning around. Acquire whatever medications are necessary from Mobile. Have a doctor come out, and if he refuses to provide adequate treatment, find someone who will. Miss Sarah, the expense. I am unconcerned about the expense. Our father is responsible for this. We will not allow them to perish due to his depravity. This was the first crack in the facade that Marcus had observed. The initial sign that the twins might be driven by motives beyond mere self-preservation. He noted it as valuable intelligence. Dr. Grayfield arrived 2 days later, annoyed at being called to treat slaves. He examined the ill women with barely concealed disdain, confirmed the diagnosis, and prescribed mercury treatments with the cheerful assurance of someone who did not particularly care whether the patient survived. The treatment regimen lasts for months, he stated, washing his hands in the basin. A house servant was provided. However, results cannot be guaranteed. To be frank, it may be more cost-effective to simply isolate them and allow nature to take its course. It would be advisable to replace them with healthier stock. We will accept your prescription, Catherine stated coldly. Additionally, we will require you to examine the entire enslaved population. Everyone must identify all potential cases. Grayfield raised his eyebrows in surprise. That amounts to over 40 individuals. The financial burden will be ours to manage. When can you commence? The examinations were conducted over a span of 3 days in August, taking place in a cabin that Pritchett had cleared for this specific purpose. Grayfield operated with mechanical precision, documenting symptoms in a ledger and providing diagnoses with the bedside manner akin to that of a livestock inspector. The final tally was more alarming than Marcus had anticipated. 14 confirmed cases and an additional 8 probable ones. Almost a third of Belle River's enslaved population had been afflicted due to the colonel's systematic mistreatment. Sarah and Catherine absorbed this information in silence. Then, Sarah made a decision that would have astonished their father and perplexed their neighbors. We will treat all of them, she declared. Procure the mercury, the bandages, and anything else that is necessary. We must provide improved rations for the ill. They require strength to endure the treatment. Work quotas will be reduced. And Marcus, you will oversee the treatments, maintaining detailed records of who receives what and their progress. Miss Sarah Pritchard raised an objection. This will incur costs in the thousands of dollars and significantly diminish productivity. Your father would never approve of this. Our father is the one who did this to them, Catherine interjected. We are rectifying his damage. The cost is inconsequential. What the twins failed to express even to one another was the intricate motivation behind their choice. In part, it was practical. Deceased slaves could not labor, and the plantation's worth relied on its workforce. In part, it was guilt, acknowledging their involvement in their father's system, even as his victims. Yet in part, it was something else, something neither wished to scrutinize too closely. The realization that their father's most significant crime was not the particular atrocities he had perpetrated, but the underlying belief that other individuals existed solely as tools for his ends. They had been brought up to adopt the same mindset. Now faced with the human toll of that perspective, they were compelled to decide what kind of individuals they would become. Marcus observed these changes with increasing bewilderment. He had anticipated encountering monsters at Belle River, individuals who regarded him as less than human. Instead, he discovered 2 women who had been warped by their father's abuse, now endeavoring to disentangle their own humanity from the toxicity he had instilled in them. This did not render them allies. It did not imply that he trusted them, but it complicated his straightforward narrative of oppressor, and oppressed in ways that rendered his documentation more challenging. As Marcus wrestled with moral intricacies, the marriage discussions reached a critical juncture. In September, Breenage arrived at Bell River with a proposition. His nephew, Thomas Breenage, aged 34, had recently returned from New Orleans where the cotton brokerage had collapsed due to what was tactfully referred to as unfortunate investments. Thomas was in need of a new beginning and a wealthy alliance. Sarah sought a husband who would gain the approval of the executives. Breenage proclaimed it a perfect match, having already made up his mind on the issue. Thomas possesses impeccable lineage, is knowledgeable in plantation management, and will offer the consistent male guidance you need. Sarah encountered Thomas on 2 occasions before arriving at her decision. He exhibited weakness, vanity, and was heavily indebted, which rendered him ideal for her objectives. "I will consent to the union," she informed Breenage, "under certain stipulations, including a prenuptial agreement that grants me sole control over Bell River. Thomas will receive an annual income, yet will hold no decision-making power regarding plantation affairs, and the marriage will not occur until my sister's match is also secured. Those conditions are quite unusual. Those conditions are non-negotiable. Thomas is sufficiently desperate to acquiesce. We are both aware of this." Breenage stammered but found it difficult to dispute the evaluation. Thomas did consent, signing a prenuptial agreement that effectively rendered him a compensated figurehead in return for respectability and liberation from his creditors. Catherine's match proved to be more challenging. Edmund Vlay had become restless and redirected his interest towards a widow in Montgomery. The executives dismissed 3 other candidates for various reasons. Time was of the essence. They had until February 1849, and it was already October 1847. Then Catherine proposed an idea that altered everything. "What if I choose not to marry at all?" Sarah lifted her gaze from the ledgers they had been examining. "The will necessitates both of us. The will necessitates both of us to marry within a period of 24 months. It does not mention anything regarding remaining married. I could enter into marriage, conceive, and then unfortunate events may occur, particularly to husbands in poor health." The room became quiet. Marcus, who was seated at the desk where he had been transcribing correspondence, felt a chill run down his spine. "Are you implying murder?" he asked in a low voice. "I am proposing that we adhere to the stipulations of our father's will by any means required," Catherine responded. "He never indicated that the husbands had to live." "Catherine," Sarah began, "do not act as if you have not contemplated this. Thomas Breenage will pose a challenge. He is weak, yet not foolish. Once you are wed, he will attempt to assert his dominance regardless of your condition. Men of that nature invariably do. They are unable to restrain themselves." Sarah did not contest this, which was sufficient as an answer. In that instant, Marcus realized he had severely misjudged the situation. He had assumed the twins were victims of their circumstances, desperate women seeking to liberate themselves from their father's influence through extreme measures. However, they were their father's daughters in ways that transcended mere blood relations. They had learned to perceive individuals as hurdles to be navigated or eliminated. "If you are contemplating murder," he stated cautiously, "I wish to have no involvement in it. That is not what I consented to." "You consented to follow our directives," Catherine reminded him. "And you will continue to do so because the alternative is being sold south. Do you recall? Then sell me south. I refuse to be complicit in murder." The twins exchanged looks. Sarah was the first to speak, her tone gentler. "Catherine is speaking in theoretical terms. We are not intending to kill anyone, but she is correct that we must evaluate all potential outcomes. This predicament is more intricate than we had expected." Marcus did not trust her, yet he also acknowledged that he had no favorable choices. If he declined to comply, they could indeed sell him away, and his documentation would be lost. If he reported their plans to authorities, he would be dismissed, a slave's word against white women's, and likely executed for daring to make accusations. Therefore, he did what enslaved individuals had always done. He nodded, agreed, and began strategizing on how to safeguard himself when the inevitable violence arrived. November ushered in the first frost and a new development. Sarah's wedding to Thomas Breenage was set for December 15th. The ceremony was to be held at Bell River, with Reverend Yates officiating. Catherine would take on the role of maid of honor. The executives would be present to witness the fulfillment of the first condition. However, behind the wedding arrangements, darker schemes were forming. Sarah and Marcus initiated their physical relationship in early November. Clinical encounters occurred in the locked study after Catherine had retired for the night. Sarah approached it with the same cold efficiency she applied to plantation management. This was reproduction, not intimacy, a biological function necessary to achieve a goal. Marcus found it profoundly unsettling, not solely due to the racial taboo they were breaching, though that danger loomed over every encounter, but because of the emotional void of it, the manner in which Sarah could completely dissociate physical acts from human connection. "My father did this to dozens of women," she remarked one night afterward as they lay apart on the study floor. "He forced them into precisely this situation, and I vowed I would never be like him. Yet here I am." "You're not forcing me," Marcus said, although it wasn't entirely accurate. "The threat of being sold south loomed over everything, aren't I? You're enslaved. By definition, you cannot consent." I convince myself, "This is different because I am offering you freedom afterward, because we are partners in this deception, but we are not partners. I own you." There is no consent possible in that dynamic. It was the most truthful statement she had made to him, and it exacerbated everything because it indicated she comprehended precisely what she was doing and proceeded regardless. In mid-November, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. Dr. Grayfield confirmed this during a visit to monitor the syphilis treatments. The executives were thrilled, having satisfied one condition, with another still pending. Thomas Breenage, who had arrived at Bell River 2 weeks prior to prepare for the wedding, received the news with the blissful ignorance of a man who thought his own virility accounted for everything. Meanwhile, Catherine's situation remained unresolved. She had turned down 6 prospective husbands, much to the frustration of the executives, and was dangerously close to the deadline on the calendar. Then, in early December, she made a significant announcement. "I have found someone suitable. Mr. Lawrence Kemper, a widower aged 51, owns a small plantation in Wilcox County. He has moderate means, a respectable reputation, and no children from his previous marriage. I will need to meet him," Breenage stated. "Naturally, he will visit next week." Lawrence Kemper arrived on December 8th. He was a thin, anxious man with graying hair and a persistent cough that hinted at consumption. He spoke very little, constantly deferring to Catherine, and appeared pathetically grateful for her attention. "He is perfect," Catherine told Marcus after Kemper had departed, slowly dying, desperate for companionship, and too weak to assert any authority. "The executives will approve of him because he meets their superficial criteria, and he will be dead within a year, leaving me a widow free to act as I wish." "You intend to let him die of consumption?" "I will allow nature to take its course." "Is that murder, Marcus? Marrying a sick man knowing he won't survive?" Marcus had no response. That did not seem like a moral evasion. Sarah's wedding occurred on a cold, clear December day. 40 guests attended, filling Bell River's parlor with the scent of perfume and wood smoke from the fireplaces. Reverend Yates conducted the ceremony with his customary ponderous solemnity. Thomas Breenage appeared quite pleased with himself, clearly believing he had secured a valuable prize. Sarah donned a dress of ivory silk that Catherine had sewn. Her expression during the ceremony was as blank as that of a porcelain doll. Marcus observed from the back of the room, technically acting as additional household staff for the occasion. He witnessed Sarah recite her vows without any hesitation. He saw her accept Thomas's kiss with perfect poise. He observed her smile and received congratulations from guests who were oblivious to the nature of the performance they were witnessing. Later that night, after the guests had left and Thomas had intoxicated himself into a stupor in his new quarters, Sarah entered the study, where Marcus was waiting. "It is finished," she stated plainly. "The first condition has been met, and Thomas will comply with my directives. I made that abundantly clear during our wedding night discussion. He is granted a comfortable lifestyle, an annual income, and the facade of authority. In return, he will keep out of my affairs and refrain from questioning the operations of this plantation." He consented to that. He agreed to avoid being exposed as a fraud who embezzled from his business partners in New Orleans. "I secured his cooperation through threats, Marcus, just as I did with yours. I am my father's daughter, do not forget." The bitterness in her tone was unfamiliar, and Marcus recognized it as a potential threat. Sarah was starting to despise herself for the person she was becoming, which indicated she might act unpredictably to demonstrate her difference from her father, or commit something dreadful to show her indifference. Catherine's wedding was set for January 20th, 1848. The executives approved Lawrence. After minimal examination, Keir appeared to be in good standing. His background was verified, his property ownership was legitimate, and his intense desire to remarry obscured any potential concerns. However, during the weeks leading up to the two weddings, a change occurred at Belle River. The household staff began to murmur about disputes between the twins, with raised voices heard behind closed doors. Pritchett noted that both women appeared preoccupied, making decisions regarding plantation management only to reverse them hours later. Marcus was aware of the unfolding situation. The pressure of sustaining their ruse, coupled with Sarah's escalating self-hatred and Catherine's increasingly calculating demeanor, was undermining their previously cohesive front. The situation escalated the night before Catherine's wedding. While Marcus was in the study working on his confidential documents, he heard screams emanating from upstairs. He hurried up to discover Sarah and Catherine in Sarah's bedroom. Catherine had blood streaming from her nose, while Sarah bore scratch marks on her face. "She wants to kill him," Sarah yelled upon seeing Marcus. "Not just let him die, but actually poison him." "He's dying anyway," Catherine retorted. "Why wait? Why take the chance of him altering his mind about the marriage conditions? We administer arsenic to him. He dies in 6 months. I become a widow and pregnant, and we are finished with all of this because that makes us murderers. Actual, intentional murderers. We are already murderers. Or had you forgotten the coffee you served father the night he passed away?" The room fell silent. Marcus gazed at the twins, a wave of understanding washing over him with nauseating clarity. "You killed your father," he stated. Sarah collapsed onto the bed, her face buried in her hands. Arsenic combined with powdered glass in his coffee. Small doses over 3 weeks made it appear as though he succumbed to heart failure. Dr. Grayfield never suspected anything amiss because he was inclined to believe it was due to natural causes. "We had no choice," Catherine asserted, her tone resolute. "He intended to sell Marcus and 3 other slaves to a trader from Mississippi. We overheard him making arrangements, and he intended to coerce us into marriages with men he had chosen, men who would assist him in perpetuating his breeding program. We had no choice." "There is always a choice," Marcus replied softly. "Easy for you to say," Catherine retorted. "You are not confined in a cage constructed by a man who perceives you as a biological experiment. I am also trapped in a cage, albeit a different type, and I have never taken a life to escape it." The dispute might have persisted, but they heard footsteps ascending the stairs. Thomas, stumbling drunkenly towards his wife's bedroom. The 3 conspirators fell silent, listening to him curse as he struggled with the door handle, then ultimately give up and shuffle away. After he departed, Sarah spoke in a low voice. "We cannot repeat this, Catherine. If you poison Lawrence, it will be the end. Someone will notice. Someone will investigate. And all of this, the plantation, our freedom, Marcus's documentation, everything will be obliterated. So what do you propose? We are running out of time. We wait. We allow nature to take its course with Lawrence. We endure. And when it is finally over, when we have met father's conditions and secured the inheritance, then we will determine who we wish to become." Catherine did not respond immediately. When she finally did, her voice was weary. "I do not know if I can endure any longer. I do not know if there is anything left of me to salvage." Marcus, observing them, realized he had been documenting the wrong narrative. He had concentrated on the Colonel's atrocities, the systematic abuse, the breeding program. However, the true horror of Belle River was not solely what had been inflicted upon enslaved individuals, though that was horrific enough. It was what had been done to the twins themselves, the manner in which their father had distorted them into weapons and then directed them against one another. They were both victims and perpetrators, ensnared in roles they had not chosen, yet were now executing with increasing intensity. Desperation loomed. Marcus found himself ensnared with them, his very survival hinging on a plan that appeared increasingly likely to culminate in devastating violence. Catherine's wedding to Lawrence Kemper occurred on January 20th, 1848, a modest event with merely 20 attendees. Kemper appeared gaunt, his cough exacerbated by the frigid January air. He required Catherine's assistance to reach the parlor where Reverend Yates awaited. The ceremony spanned 12 minutes. When Yates declared them married, Keir attempted to kiss his bride but was interrupted by a violent coughing fit that stained his handkerchief with blood. "Consumption has taken a toll on him," Dr. Grayfield remarked to Breenage. "Give him 6 months, perhaps less." That evening, Lawrence Kemper relocated to Belle River, choosing a bedroom situated far from Catherine's. He seemed pathetically appreciative of every minor act of kindness, repeatedly expressing gratitude to the servants for providing him with water and tending to his fire. Catherine and Marcus commenced their meetings in early February. In contrast to Sarah's bitter candor, Catherine approached it as yet another task to be executed with efficiency. She arranged specific times and departed without engaging in conversation afterward. By March, Catherine discovered she was pregnant. Lawrence Kemper, confined to his bed due to his deteriorating health, received the news with a mix of confusion and delight. "Thank God," he gasped. "You will have something to remember me by." In April, the executives arrived to confirm both pregnancies. They found everything in proper order. Both twins were married, both were expecting, and cotton production remained stable. Breenage expressed his satisfaction. Meanwhile, Marcus dedicated his nights to documenting every detail. He now possessed evidence of the colonel's breeding program, the syphilis outbreak, the poisoning incidents, and the marriage scheme. Yet he remained perplexed about how to transport the documents north without being apprehended. In May, a traveling preacher named Jacob Sturgis appeared, claiming to gather donations for missionary work. During dinner, Sturgis alluded to his time spent in Philadelphia. Marcus noted the emphasis, a well-known abolitionist center. He made a subtle hand gesture, a signal commonly used by operatives of the Underground Railroad. Stures paused mid-sentence, his gaze shifting to Marcus, then resumed speaking without hesitation. Later, Marcus approached him near the stable. "I possess documents, evidence of crimes. They must reach Philadelphia." After some thought, Sturgis consented. Marcus dedicated 10 days to meticulously copying his most vital documents onto thin paper, writing in minuscule script. He recorded the colonel's experiments, the forced breeding, the syphilis epidemic, the poisoning, and his involvement in the twins' scheme. He enlisted Isaiah, a field worker, to transport the documents to Sturgis in Selma. 2 weeks later, Isaiah returned, confirming the delivery. Marcus experienced a mix of liberation and fear. The evidence now existed outside the twins' control, yet if discovered, he would be a dead man. As summer progressed, tension escalated. Sarah's pregnancy advanced without complications, although she became increasingly withdrawn. Thomas Breenage resorted to heavy drinking. Lawrence Kemp remained in his sick room, cared for by attentive servants. Then Sarah began visiting Lawrence, bringing him books. He had once been a teacher, he explained. Before inheriting a plantation, he had never learned to manage effectively. "I'm merely a school teacher who wished to read books," he said weakly. "Is that so wrong?" Sarah had no response. On August 17, 1848, Lawrence Kemper passed away in his sleep due to consumption. He was interred 3 days later, his brief existence commemorated with a simple headstone. Lawrence Kemper, 1797-1848. He ultimately found peace. Catherine, now a pregnant widow, had fulfilled the conditions of the will. However, after Lawrence's death, something shifted within her. She felt guilt, despite not having directly caused his demise. In mid-September, a woman surfaced, claiming to be the colonel's half-sister, and threatened legal action unless she received a settlement. The twins recognized her as a fraud, but before they could intervene, she approached Pritchett with an offer of bribery. Pritchett promptly reported this incident. Armed with this information, the twins confronted the imposter and her attorney in Hanville. The encounter was short and harsh. They departed Alabama within 24 hours, yet the event exposed their vulnerability. Until the babies were born, they remained targets. By late October, the situation nearly spiraled out of control. Thomas Breenage, intoxicated after a card game victory, revealed that Sarah had been pregnant shortly after their marriage. The timing was surprisingly swift. News spread throughout Lown County within days. The scandal struck Bell River like a violent storm. Breenage arrived, demanding answers. Sarah made a decisive choice. Standing before esteemed neighbors, 7 months pregnant, she delivered a calculated confession. "I was violated," she stated firmly. "Before our marriage, Thomas and I were intimate. I became pregnant. Rather than cancel the marriage and face disgrace, we chose to proceed with the ceremony. It was wrong. It was sinful. However, it does not invalidate our father's will." The men exchanged uneasy glances. Premarital intimacy was indeed scandalous, yet not without precedent. Sarah's candid admission, the narrative was rendered credible, a fabrication that safeguarded the more significant deception lurking beneath. "What about your sister?" Breenage inquired. "Catherine's circumstances are entirely appropriate." Breenage scrutinized her intently but found no proof to refute her account. "This issue is resolved," he ultimately stated. "The stipulations of the will have been fulfilled." Once everyone departed, Sarah crumpled in the parlor, her composure finally shattering. Sarah entered labor on November 14, 1848. The labor endured for 18 hours. At dawn on November 15th, a baby's wail shattered the morning stillness. "A girl," the midwife declared. "Small yet healthy." Sarah reclined, fatigued against the pillows, her daughter swathed in blankets beside her. The infant possessed dark hair and indistinct features, advantageous in a household founded on deceit. "She is free," Sarah murmured. "That is all that matters." Catherine gave birth on December 7th after 12 arduous hours, with the umbilical cord entangled around the baby's neck. The midwife operated with serene efficiency until a faint cry confirmed the baby's survival. "Another girl," she remarked. "She is a fighter." Catherine gazed at her daughter, darker than Sarah's child, with features that necessitated careful explanation. "I shall name her Ruth after our mother." "And mine will be Abigail," Sarah replied through tears. "After the grandmother we never knew." The names paid tribute to women their father had erased. They represented the first choices the twins made that were not calculated for gain, simply mothers naming their daughters. The executors arrived on December 20th to confirm both births and complete the estate transfer. Breenage assessed the infants clinically, acknowledged their existence, and declared the conditions of the will fully met. Bell River Plantation is hereby transferred to Sarah Breenage and Catherine Kemper. The estate is officially concluded. After his departure, Sarah felt nothing. No victory, no relief, only fatigue. They had triumphed. However, the expenses had been substantial. Marcus entered while carrying Abigail. She is yearning for her mother. As Sarah received her daughter, she resolved to take action. "We are fulfilling our commitment. Your manumission documents will be submitted next week. There are adequate funds to travel to Philadelphia and establish yourself there." Marcus had anticipated some delays. The straightforwardness surprised him. "Just like that. We reached an agreement. I am honoring it. And regarding the documents I dispatched north." Sarah's gaze sharpened. "I am aware of those. Pritchett intercepts all correspondence. I know their contents. Everything concerning father's initiatives, the poisoning, our agreement. Then why did you not act?" "Because you were correct to document it. Someone must convey the truth. Perhaps your testimony will reach individuals capable of instigating change." Catherine arrived with Ruth. "We are not hindering you, but we request a 6-month period. Remain until June. Assist in stabilizing operations. Then depart with our endorsement and sufficient funds to start anew." It was a skillful manipulation, yet also sincere. 6 months, he consented. The winter passed with relative tranquility. Treatments for syphilis continued, with several individuals making complete recoveries. The twins adapted to motherhood while efficiently managing plantation operations. Marcus spent his evenings preparing for departure, yet he found himself hesitant to leave. He formed a bond with the children he had fathered and developed a complex understanding of the twins themselves. They were victims striving to escape their victimhood, attempting to become better than their upbringing had shaped them to be. In March, a letter arrived from Penn. A letter from Pennsylvania addressed to Marcus was sent by Jacob Sturgis. The testimony had been received by the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, which was compiling it for a report concerning Alabama plantations. Sarah quietly remarked that her father's legacy would be one of exposure and condemnation. Everything he stood for would serve as evidence of the system's depravity. Marcus responded, stating that he was a monster. "I understand, but he was also my father," he added. They rescheduled Marcus's departure to mid-April. The night before his departure, Sarah summoned him to the study. "I've been reflecting on what we did," she stated. "We convinced ourselves that we were different from father because we granted you freedom. However, we were not different. We merely employed more sophisticated coercion. I understand. Yet you remained for the additional months, completed the treatments, and honored your agreement, even after you were aware that I had discovered your documentation." Sarah presented him with a satchel filled with gold coins. "This amount exceeds our agreement. Additionally, there are letters of introduction to merchants who will not question a freed slave possessing the proper papers." "Why?" "Because Abigail and Ruth will eventually inquire about their father. I wish to tell them he was a good man who made difficult choices and documented the truth when others sought to bury it." Catherine entered with both babies. "We are bidding farewell properly, as families ought to do. Marcus held his daughters one last time, committing their faces to memory. "Be good," he whispered. "Be better than all of us." Marcus departed from Bell River on April 18, 1849, carrying his papers and a dagger that Sarah had commissioned. In secrecy, he held both girls on his back. Marcus and his daughters, April 1849. May they all attain freedom. He arrived in Mobile and arranged for passage northward. The ship set sail on April 23rd. He never returned to Alabama, but his testimony did. The Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society released their report in July 1849, which detailed the conditions on plantations and specifically named Colonel Nathaniel Sutton. This report incited outrage in the northern states and anger in the southern ones. In August, Harold Greenidge began to inquire about how information from Bell River had reached Pennsylvania. On September 3rd, he came with a sheriff and a warrant to search for evidence of abolitionist activities. Marcus was manumitted, and Sarah responded calmly. "He departed with our blessing. Whatever actions he took afterward are his concern. He appropriated property, your father's journals. My father's journals were passed down to us. We granted Marcus access as part of his responsibilities. What he did with that access remains a matter of speculation." The search continued for 3 hours. They discovered nothing. Catherine had incinerated all potentially incriminating materials weeks prior. Greenidge was compelled to leave without any findings, although his farewell words were threatening. "This is not concluded. Eventually, someone will uncover the truth." After his departure, Catherine remarked, "We must vanish." It required 6 weeks. They sold Bell River for immediate cash, manumitted several key individuals with funds to help them establish themselves, and sold the remaining population to a Quaker merchant who had promised transportation to free states. Thomas received his property in cash. Settlement reached to agree not to contest the sale. On October 14, 1849, Sarah and Catherine embarked on a ship in Mobile destined for New Orleans, traveling as widows accompanied by their infant daughters. However, prior to their departure from Alabama, they made one last visit. On October 15th, a fire ignited in the basement of the Hanville courthouse. The structure blazed for 6 hours, ultimately collapsing before dawn. 3 bodies were discovered, identified as vagrants seeking refuge, although no one investigated why they had been shackled in the basement. The investigation determined that an overturned lamp was the cause of the accidental fire. Most county records from 1847 to 1849 were lost. Anyone attempting to trace the history of Bell River would encounter only fragments and voids. Sarah and Catherine arrived in Wisconsin in December 1849. They acquired a small farm near Madison using fictitious identities, presenting themselves as widowed sisters starting anew. Their daughters grew up with the understanding that their mothers hailed from Alabama, had escaped challenging circumstances, and that their father had been a good man who made sacrifices. Marcus established himself in Philadelphia as a bookkeeper. He never married, had no other children, and refrained from discussing Alabama publicly. Yet he continued to provide testimony and assisted in the transportation of escaped slaves until the onset of the Civil War. He kept the jure type concealed, occasionally taking it out to gaze at his daughters' faces. In 1863, a Union lieutenant uncovered a sealed trunk in the ruins of Bell River containing journals and breeding logs that validated everything in the report. New horrors were introduced. The documents became integral to the argument for the complete abolition of slavery. Colonel Nathaniel Sutton's legacy unfolded precisely as his daughters had foreseen. Exposure, condemnation, and evidence of systematic evil emerged. However, the complete truth regarding Sarah and Catherine, Marcus, and the children remained concealed within charred records and meticulously crafted falsehoods. The courthouse fire was never resolved. The bodies were never identified. The documents were never retrieved. Consequently, the truth about the Alabama twin sisters, who shared one male slave until both became pregnant, lay buried in ash and silence for over a century. Some historians assert that the narrative is fabricated, claiming no records exist to substantiate the alleged occurrences. Others reference the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society's report, contending that where documentation exists, so does truth. Yet perhaps the verifiability of every detail is not of utmost importance. What truly matters is what the narrative uncovers about the system that rendered such events not only possible, but nearly inevitable. A system predicated on the treatment of human beings as property, employing violence and deception as mechanisms of control. The Sutton twins, if they indeed existed, were both victims and perpetrators. Marcus, if he lived, was simultaneously a collaborator and a resistance fighter. The children inherited a legacy of trauma and survival, guilt and resilience. Meanwhile, the rest of us bear the responsibility to remember, to scrutinize, and to ensure that the conditions which fostered such horrors never arise again. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think this story has unveiled all its secrets? Or are there still hidden truths within those charred documents? Please share your opinions in the comments regarding the events that transpired at Bell River Plantation. If you found this narrative intriguing and wish to explore more dark enigmas from neglected American history, consider subscribing to Liturgy of Fear. Don't forget to activate the notification bell and share this video with someone who values the unsettling realities concealed in our history. The upcoming tale may prove to be even more disturbing than this one. In the meantime, keep in mind that the most sinister parts of history are frequently those that individuals have endeavored the most to obliterate.